Number is still rising, but it's time.
And it continues.
Yeah, it continues to rise, but that's okay. People can still join us. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining. We are very excited to be here for you today. And actually, it's very special for me as well, because I don't get to see my colleagues in real life every day. And they are with me here today. You probably know that we are quite international. We're in Lithuania today. But I have my favorite head of operations from Budapest, Hungary.
Hi, everybody.
His name is Albert Bagfi. Let's see if I also can move the slides. That would help. Yes. So that's Albert Bagfi, head of PV operations in Biomapas. My favorite international QPPV and head of medical information, Olga Simaki.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for joining.
All the way from Athens, Greece. Myself, I'm the head of global pharmacovigilance. I come from a tiny town in the Netherlands that nobody knows, and it's not Amsterdam, but that doesn't matter. We're in Lithuania today together, the three of us, for you. We're very excited. We're also completely not used to doing these things together in real life. So that means we might be playing a bit with the camera positions. You can also play with your camera positions. You can switch the gallery mode to something else or just try out what works for you. We'll do our best, but don't be surprised if we look into the wrong camera. All right? Good. Let's get started. Thank you once again all for joining. As mentioned, you can ask your questions as well. We'll try to address that in the second half of this webinar. We are Biomapas. We have some things to say about our company, but I will keep that very short. Probably many of you already know what we roughly do. We do a lot of service in the life science area, amongst others, clinical research, regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance, and medical information. Today, we're going to talk, well, primarily or only about pharmacovigilance, I think, but we'll see. Just very shortly about our company, we exist for over 20 years. Headquarters is in Lithuania, but we operate very much worldwide. We have over 300 colleagues across the globe, and we are very proud that we have 89% of our clients recurring each time. So that's just very shortly about Biomapas, but then what are we planning to discuss today in this webinar? So we want to explore some of the challenges that companies may face when setting up a pharmacovigilance system in Europe, how to avoid problems. And just a slight disclaimer at the beginning, this is going to be a bit the basic session. I hope you don't mind this. If it's too basic, then I'm sorry, but we will do a next webinar, which is going to be more advanced. That will come in January. But still, I hope for all of you who joined today, there's maybe still something to learn or to refresh your knowledge about the European PV setup in pharmacovigilance. So first of all, I will start explaining, it sounds really silly, but what do we mean actually when we say Europe or EU? And then we go a bit, what is actually a pharmacovigilance system? Then how to set this up and some challenges. And that's going to be roughly the first half of the meeting. And then I would like to go into a bit more roundtable discussion with my colleagues here, but you as well, if you have any questions, feel free to raise and we'll try to address your questions. So let's go. I told you I would say something about Europe, and that seems obvious, but even for Europeans, I still notice sometimes that we have some confusion about what applies exactly where and what is the difference between three terms that all start with Europe. Europe, obviously, are all countries that are geographically located in Europe. Look at the map of Europe, and this is Europe. It's as simple as that. So that includes some countries that are maybe not part of certain unions, like Switzerland, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Serbia, Albania, and there are more countries that are geographically located in Europe, but they're not part of European Union or European Economic Area. If they are not in this European Economic Area, in terms of PV, that means they follow their national legislation. UK is the latest example of that, very specific, of course, but they fully go on their own national legislation now. European Union or EU That's just 27 countries within Europe. Okay, most of the countries that you see on the European map, but it's 27 countries and they are part of this European Union. And for that, there are very clear, let's say, legislations for all these countries altogether. There's a regulation and there's a directive. Honestly, I try to read them from time to time and I always stop because it's such a legal documentation that it's a bit hard to understand what it means in practice. I will come back a little bit more to this if I explain the EU GVP modules. But keep in mind, those GVP modules are extremely important for the whole European Union, all those 27 countries, and even a bit more. I'll come to this. National legislation also still exists. I will explain this a bit more in one of the later slides. Third one, European Economic Area. That's everything from the previous slide, 27 countries, plus Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein. Look at what they have in terms of pharmacovigilance legislation. It's exactly the same as on the previous slide. This is also where it gets sometimes a bit confusing, EU, EEA. In terms of pharmacovigilance, that means the same legislation. Now, I told you I would explain a little bit more when I said I don't read every day the regulation and the directive. I used to read every day the GVPs. And that is what they were made for, to give practical guidance on how you should read these legal requirements. And a bit more detailed, it's, of course, the term, it sounds a bit like GCP, GMP, GDP, and that's on purpose. It is now part of these GXP standards. It is, as I call it now, some kind of code of conduct to be compliant with the law. And these documents, these modules are also updated just a bit more often than the underlying legislation, because that cannot be updated so easily. The GVP modules, they are updated from time to time based on the most recent learnings and experience from industry and health authorities. So, am I clear so far? Did I miss? No, we're good? Okay, good. So we understand what is Europe, what is EU, and what is EEA.
It's GVP.
And GVP, yes, not to forget about this. Good. I put one more link in there. Yeah, you cannot click on it now, of course, but at least you can Google it. If you get lost with definitions or abbreviations on this GVP legislation, there is actually a document on the EMA website which gives very clear explanations of those terms and definitions. So that could be good even if I say something today that you don't understand, go to that link and you will find your answer. Right, let's move a bit more to full pharmacovigilance system, PV system. What is that not? An IT system. First confusion. It is a term that is used in GVP. They always talk about pharmacovigilance system, and I realize that sometimes people think this is maybe the safety database. You need to have a robust safety database. Of course, you need to have that. That is in the picture there as well. But this is just one of the many, many elements of the whole system. It's basically everything you need to have in place in the EU and the EEA to have a functioning pharmacovigilance system. That means case processing there. There are other processes that are part of this system as well. You have aggregate reporting like PSURs, DSURs. Benefit risk is just, I called it like this as one bucket, but there are many things under that, like risk management plans, but also signal detection, how you deal with that. A BSMF, we'll come to that, what that is, but this is very important also for the UKQPV, the quality management system. And on top of all of that, of this whole system, I put EU QPPV. That is one person, usually with one or multiple deputies, but this is an extremely important role within the EU legislation. And maybe just as one side step, usually we get the question also from our clients, like when do we need to have such a system in place? When would we start with this? Olga, any idea?
Yes, of course. So, except for the PV system, we have the summary of pharmacovigilance system. Again, the system is there, but we do not mean the database. We mean the full processes and procedures in place. So, QPPV name and appears for first time in the marketing authorization dossier that is submitted along with SPS, summary of pharmacovigilance system for marketing application. After the marketing application and before the marketing authorization approval, QPPV should be registered in Ultravigilance to enable product registration in XCVMPD. So we can say that the name of the QPPV should be available upon marketing authorization application. However, the official appointment is taking place in Ultravigilance between the marketing authorization application and the approval. But this is not the only pharmacovigilance activity required. The company must do worldwide literature search at the time that the marketing application is submitted, including the period between submission of the dossier and authorization of the marketing application. The reason is that any information that comes to applicant may impact the benefit risk balance. We also see this in the slide. So the applicant, even at this stage, should report to the authorities, to the applicable authorities, all the safety information to be assessed under the evaluation of the application.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I hope you all made notes. I told you this was going to be the basic webinar, but yeah, can you imagine what the advanced will be? This is already where it gets a little bit more tricky. We get a lot of questions on this, and there's, let's say, the legal expectation, but there's also what is a bit more advisable in practice. These are the fine tunings where, you know, we also help people. I see there was a raised hand, but if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. That's easier for us to address. Thank you very much for your engagement. I want to continue this full PV system from, let's say, what happens on a more international level versus what happens on a local level. And then maybe I should mention people as well. Also, the staff is part of the pharmacovigilance system. Having highly qualified staff in all the countries where you operate, that's very important, and they are an essential part of your PV system as well. So on a local level, that means they receive spontaneous reports, they do literature screening, they do regulatory intelligence, other things. We might come to this later. And this is typically what Albert is also overseeing with his team. And just maybe, Albert, one question. Spontaneous reports, what kind? What would be sources of that, for example?
I think, thank you, Martin. It's a very, if I think about local activities, it's a very important source for adverse event reports, adverse event information. And locally, we're talking about two types of sources mainly. One of them is the local spontaneous reports in local language that you collected locally and then translated and sent to the headquarters. And also the local literature review that is supporting signal detection and also a source for adverse event information. I think these are the two main sources we see more frequently happening and provides information eventually to the safety database.
Yeah. Exactly. And out of curiosity, I looked it up yesterday, how many official languages there are in EU, and it's a lot. I mentioned 27 member states. I believe there are 24 officially recognized business languages. But yeah, and that means you need to have, if you operate in those countries, the people with both the language skills and the PV experience. And that is not always easy to find and sustain that whole network. We'll come back to this a bit later as well. All right, I said something about EU QPPV, and just to add, there can also be national QPPVs. Maybe for some of you this is clear already, but let me just repeat a bit what that role means. This is a designated official within a company responsible for ensuring that the company complies with all requirements of pharmacovigilance. It's a very important role. It's usually a very senior role as well. It's a person that should have a lot of knowledge, skills, and experience to oversee the PV system. Not only the system, but also of the products that are in scope, the benefit risk profile. Basically, because it's 24/7 responsibility, as a QPPV, you should expect a call any time of the day, night, weekend, and be able to answer, how does this change the benefit risk profile of my product? It doesn't go that fast in reality, but it could mean in case of emergencies, a QPPV is called on a Saturday night and starts gathering together the team of people in the company to discuss what needs to happen in terms of safety actions, for example. They are also legally accountable. And that is done on purpose to put some pressure on at least one person in a company to take pharmacovigilance very seriously, because that person will feel the pressure, if it's not under control, that the legal consequences will be for him or her having this QPPV role. A similar thing exists in some countries on a national level. And we'll also come back to this a bit more, because that's maybe a question like, what is applicable in which country? We'll come to this. If we stick with the EU QPPV for a while, one question is, how can one person, maybe with one or two deputies, keep oversight on this whole system at any time? And a very important source of information for that is the Pharmacovigilance System Master File, or PSMF. This is not, let's say, one Word document, also not two. It's usually a huge collection of documents that describe this whole PV system. Should always be up to date. It should also be ready at any time to hand it over to health authorities if they ask for it. And it includes a lot of information on the QPPV, the qualifications of the QPPV, the CV, the whole background, how the QPPV is empowered, on the organization that is in place for the whole pharmacovigilance setup. On safety sources, Albert mentioned a few, but there are more. IT systems that are used for the pharmacovigilance system, processes, metrics, quality management system, products, endless lists of, let's say, registrations, metrics. I always feel sorry for the people who have to maintain this, but this is actually a lot of work to do this properly and to keep it up to date. And that's another question we very often get, Olga, right? That clients ask us, so, okay, but how often should we update it, and how complete should it be? Is there anything you can say?
We should keep in mind that BSMF is a key oversight mechanism. So, of course, there is no one size fits to all. Every company should adapt its processes and procedures according to their products and the PV system in scope. Of course, everyone can refer to GVP Module 2 for all the requirements and expectations. Same applies to frequency. There is no fixed rule. Of course, there are certain expectations. So we see big organizations with very usual updates to review and update the PSMF at a monthly basis. Organizations that may have less updates, they may update it quarterly or after 6 months. Everything is acceptable given that all the requirements are documented in local procedures and the review is documented. PSMF should be version controlled, including all the history of changes and adapted to the local procedures and needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, we're talking about the EU PSMF. And I think the EU was the first to start with that, but it becomes more and more popular in other countries and regions of the world as well. So imagine maintaining that. That's not in scope for today's webinar, but you can understand that the maintenance is complicated of this. All right, let's move a bit again to the local level. And on purpose, I put a few abbreviations there. Maybe you recognize one or two or all or none. It's okay. What I mean is a pharmacovigilance person in each European country where your product is registered. That person should know local PV and local language, of course. LSO stands for Local Safety Officer, LPPV, Local Person for Pharmacovigilance, LDSR, Local Drug Safety Responsible, you name it. I've seen other abbreviations as well. The problem that we usually see then is that one person might call an LPPV somebody who's also a national QPPV. Another would say, no, all or local safety people are LPPV. What makes it so complicated, although the GVP is the same for whole Europe, there are still some national additions to this. I mentioned this on this map of Europe slide, but the national legislation also gives small fine-tunings to the requirements. So, for example, there are differences in nomination, whether you should nominate your local contact to the health authorities or not. Difference in place of residence. Should it be a resident of the country or is that not required? Differences in responsibilities, liability. And I don't know, I would say maybe just one or two examples you can give of what.
But it's a bit of a diverse topic. And yes, indeed, in some countries, you need to be locally present in that country to be able to be nominated as a local safety officer. In some countries, you just need to be able to speak the local language, but you don't need to reside in the same country. And yes, there are a few countries, maybe we will talk about them later, but like maybe France and Germany, who have their very specific, unique roles as the chief pharmaceutical officer in France and graduated plan officer in Germany, who have dedicated roles in these countries that are very unique to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we come a bit more to this like national QPPV type of local people, whereas some countries have much less strict requirements. Yeah, exactly. So then let's move a bit to, before we go into more discussion, the usual challenges that we see while setting up a PV system in Europe. And sorry to say it bluntly, but it starts with lack of understanding of the European regulatory landscape. Whether you come from Europe yourself or not, it sounds all so harmonized and okay, it's maybe much better than 15 years ago, but there are still these local, little differences that you need to understand to do it properly. It's hard to find experienced personnel. As we said, you're looking for people with language skills, but mostly also with PV skills, and you want them to fit in your team, etc. That's not so easy. Then sometimes you find the right PV qualified person, but then the language capabilities are lacking. Lack of dedicated resources. What I mean there, that's not so much for us, but this is for our clients, usually a big challenge. That even for rather big companies, they have some countries in Europe where they don't have enough work for a full FTE of PV. So even for some of the biggest companies, we see people who have 5 different hats. They do PV, regulatory, quality, medical information. Well, actually, their manager asked them, can you do a bit more on the commercial side? That would be better. And this is where it can be a relief to have just some small support where we, let's say, combine our efforts. For us, it's relatively easy to have own staff in those countries, whereas for many companies, yeah, they just don't have enough work for own full dedicated FTEs. Last point relates a little bit to is lack of IT infrastructure. I'm not saying that companies' IT infrastructure is not good, but for PV, you need very specific things and very expensive things. The moment you get a bit more than just a handful of cases, ICSRs, you cannot keep tracking this in Excel files. It's very time consuming, it's very risky, it's error sensitive, and also health authority inspectors, they may come to you and ask, like, really, are you still able to do this in a controlled way within this Excel file? Or shouldn't you just have a decent safety database?
Imagine the validation that a safety database needs and how this can be linked to an Excel sheet that it will never be validated in the correct way.
Yeah. But at the same time, this is also a challenge, even if companies then say, okay, let's buy this safety database. What does it cost? This amount. But you're not there yet. If you talk about validation, updates of that database.
Maybe submissions to Pharmacovigilance.
Yeah, you want people to take care of your gateway. And these are all highly specialized people that you should have in place, apart from just buying a license for a safety database. So this is quite a challenge indeed for companies. We see that a lot. And now we're perfectly on time because we're roughly halfway through the session, and it's time for Q&A. I also have a few questions in mind that I can ask from Albert and Olga. I see, for example, now just one question from the audience. Interesting one. Can an EU QPPV also be a national QPPV at the same time?
It really depends on the country and workload. For example, if an EU QPPV is based on Germany, can be GPO at the same time. The truth is that we always need to take into consideration the workload, the requirements, and if a single role could cover both of them. And don't forget this legal requirement, always have it in mind also for your PSMFs and organizational charts, that the national QPPV should always report to the EU QPPV. So don't forget in the organizational charts, it's very usual error or finding during audit and inspection that this dotted line is not obvious. So most companies prefer to have different people for this position for clarity and no conflict in the roles.
But technically or legally, this is possible.
Yeah.
There is no contraindication of this in the legislation.
Okay, good. And maybe then another one on QPPV. I see. So for QPPVs, what type of oversight is required? Yeah, I mentioned this probably, that this is one of the most important things, that they should oversee this whole PV system. And how can you obtain that as a QPPV?
Yes, if you deep dive in GVP Module 1 requirements, you will identify specific expectations in relation to maintaining a PV system and medicinal product oversight. If I could identify 4 key areas, these would be regulatory intelligence, review of new legislations, of changes in legislation, and assessment of the impact on local and global level. Compliance oversight, the EU QPPV should have fully oversight of compliance. product safety oversight, review of all regulatory commitments and of safety deliverables, of course. PSMF updates and oversight that we discussed before. PSMF has KPIs, includes KPIs. It is itself an oversight mechanism, so QPPV should fully be oversee the whole process. And we already discussed before oversight of national QPPVs. How this is obtained, usually with established procedures and processes, monthly oversights, oversight meetings, and of course documentation of all these meetings and information exchange.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank you. I see a lot of questions about QPPVs and PSMF. But Albert, you also have interesting things to say. So I'm trying to find one for you, maybe about local requirements. What do people locally need to do apart from adverse event handling?
Yeah, so this is usually what people think about, right? Locally, I need to collect the adverse events, translate them to English and forward them. But I think it's a bit more complex than that. And people tend to maybe forget about this. So I would like to highlight maybe 3 things that are quite important to be managed locally. One is to have a local QMS available. Local QMS meaning to have a system of SOPs available that would be aligned with the local SOPs and then in line with that. Also for the local QMS to manage the trainings locally, capture everything, document everything accordingly, and also, it is one important thing about trainings. It's not only about PV stuff, but all marketing authorization holder need to have an annual PV refresher training for all the stuff of that affiliate, and it has to be conducted and documented as well in a structured way. And this can be done. Yes, Mark?
Yeah, sorry, just something came to my mind that in our past this was a huge problem as well. When we tried to do this in the affiliates, when I was working in a pharma company myself, that we tried to get a time slot on the sales meeting, for example, because most of our people in affiliates were salespeople. And then we managed to get the time slot, and then 25 people were there, but 2 were missing. And then basically you're not compliant because we missed to train 2 people, and then we had to chase them and get the paper documentation in order. These sales guys completely upset. Well, why are we chasing them?
And sign the form that they completed the training and capture it accordingly. File it.
The outcome. Doing quiz, assessment of the knowledge, how it can be dragged outside the system.
Yeah.
You need to, to give all the documents to everyone, collect them, keep them in a fireproof, ward of forever.
So does it mean people can hire your team to chase their sales team, or do you have a smarter way to do this?
We do now. They don't have to capture all these trainings in a paper. Okay. We have available systems to do so, validated system just to capture these trainings. And also then, we have the trainings available for them online, most probably. So they watch the training, complete the quiz, and then it is everything documented in one system and can be audited that they completed their trainings.
Okay.
That's the way we do it. Other than this, we also have local aggregate report handling that has to be done locally. And I think one more, maybe a bigger workload, implementation of local risk minimization activities and what comes with it and tracking of it, whether everything was done on time and complete.
Yeah, and typically also there you need this local connection, of course, because that's where still local approvals from the health authorities happen. Okay. It goes in local language. I even remember that I tried to help at some point, with my English in a country where this was not appreciated. And they made it very clear, no, we want to talk with the local person only. Yeah.
And also you have to collect the evidences that these minimization activities were completed. And that's the other part, to have tracked, completed the right way.
Yeah, exactly. There's one more question from the audience. I'm not sure if it's you or you, but the question is LPPV required based on the GVP, or it only depends on the country where the product is commercialized? You said something, Olga, about, when do we need to have a PV system in place, but maybe now this is more specific LPPV, like a local person for pharmacovigilance.
Actually, it's this question for Albert. I think that it comes very often to the discussion. My product is not commercialized, is not marketed, but it is authorized. What kind of PV activities should I have in place?
Locally, the local literature review, it has to happen for the same reason as local literature review. It is a very important source of information for signal detection. It has to happen. But I think that's the main part locally that needs to be in place. And probably there are other activities globally that you have to do.
Yes, of course. But it's about LPPV, the question, correct? So I think that in this case, first of all, it depends on the country. If it has a requirement for a local person or not, and we always keep in mind that the obligations start with authorization and not with commercialization.
Exactly.
And I'm just trying to find all the other questions related to this. Maybe we answered some already, but there's a similar one about PSMF. At which point of marketing authorization or application does the PSMF have to be in place? So is it at submission of the marketing authorization or the approval?
The authorities have the right to ask for PSMF along with the MI application or during the assessment and evaluation of the marketing application. And don't forget that SPS, that is the summary of pharmacovigilance system, actually it's a summary of PSMF. So we strongly recommend that it is in place and accessible during the MA application and throughout the whole evaluation process.
I remember this discussion from my past about QPPVs as well. Like, when do you, let's say, legally need to have the QPPV, or what is advisable? And then we always said as well, like, you almost cannot start early enough. If the QPPV is part still of the whole clinical development, and when the IB is created, it's a huge benefit because that QPPV will already have the baseline understanding of the benefit risk profile. So the moment you go on the market and you get your first real life cases, you also know much better how to respond.
And if we're talking about clinical and investigation studies that you mentioned, at the beginning, this person is the responsible person for pharmacovigilance, registered in ultravigilance. Only later, when you are close to marketing application and authorization, these names should switch from responsible person to UKQPV. And the strong requirement, timeline-wise, is that upon authorization of a product, you have 15 days to register the product to ultravigilance. So this is the reason why UKQPV should already be registered to ultravigilance before authorization, so that you can meet the timeline for product registration. This is the strong timeline. We do not have many timelines at this stage, but this 15 days for registration to XVMPD, it's very strict, and it requires nomination of UKQPV already.
Absolutely. Interesting questions. Please, you can keep raising. I see still some coming in, and we'll just go through, and I'll try to combine a few maybe. What else did I see? About PSMF location. I'll take this one just to show that I also know. Should it be exactly where QPPV is situated, or where MAH headquarters is? GVP Module 1 answers this. It says, if I remember, literally, like it should be at the location of the QPPV or where the main activities of the pharmacovigilance system are executed, and that's usually headquarters or European headquarters, for example. If you're a United States company, but you have a European headquarters, maybe that's where you want to put the official location of the BSMF. I must say, in my view, it's also a bit hypothetical nowadays, because in my past, we had those things on SharePoints, so what does it mean, the official location? Still, in my past, we always had also a paper copy of the whole PSMF somewhere in a closet, fireproof cabinet in the main location of the QPPV in our case. So both are acceptable.
Exactly, and the MHRA has clarified this very recently that even for UK, it's mandatory to be electronically accessible. Exactly what you just mentioned.
Yeah. We had that discussion also. I'm just sidetracking a bit. In my past, like, isn't electronic enough? But the thing is, GVP2 says you need to be ready to submit it if needed in paper or give it to inspectors within a certain time frame, and that's very short. And that was for us always a reason to at least once a year also test, the printing. You can have it as digital copies, but if you have such an Excel file with 30 columns next to it, it will not print nicely. So once a year, we tortured one of our employees, Linda, if you're watching, thank you very much, for doing this print test. And that was such a pile of paper. Nobody ever looked at it, but at least we knew that we could provide it if that was needed.
Timely.
Yeah, timely indeed. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Can we say something more about local things? I don't see a question yet on this. Oh, wait. What is the local responsible person involvement in the additional risk minimization activities and interface with global PV or QPPV? You said already something about this, but maybe you together talk like, how does a QPPV then keep oversight of what's happening locally?
First of all, we should not forget that risk minimization materials are approved from EMA if we are talking about any EU country or centrally approved products, but they also need local approval.
Yes.
And this is the interaction that is required from local people with the authorities to submit the materials, approve the materials, and of course undertake their implementation. Exactly.
So let's say an example of additional risk minimization activities, a Dear Healthcare professional letter that has to be distributed locally in the country. So the actual letter would be managed globally, but approved with the local health authority, and or local safety officer would be responsible for the local distribution in local language in that country. So that is how the two parties would connect to each other.
And of course, if we're talking about EU QPPV oversight, should have the oversight of time distribution, about KPIs, about redistribution if it required, and follow up with the local affiliates so that everything is implemented as it is centrally approved.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, a very different question. I like this one. With a small MAH active in rare disease with a 100% outsourced PV model, what is the minimum number of PV SOPs that the MAH must have? I think I know the answer. There is no answer.
Exactly.
It depends how much topic you want to cover in one document.
Yeah. this is the point, that I understand the question comes a bit from like, okay, it's rare disease, everything is outsourced. But the question is about the MAH, I realize now. So it's not, let's say if this is outsourced to us, we have, I don't know how many SOPs to describe every little element of PV, so that you don't have to worry. As an MAH, I think the bare minimum you need to have is some kind of basic description of your PV system, even if that is outsourced, to say, where is it outsourced? What is the governance around that? How do you communicate with this service provider? How do you make sure as an MAH that still you get your updates whenever that is needed? And then the question is also, where does the QPPV sit? Well, if it's 100% outsourced, then that could be with the service provider. This is possible. But still, I'm giving the answer on behalf of you,
this is another question that actually we receive very often, if QPPV can be outsourced. So I think, if I'm not wrong, that it's mentioned in GDP 1 that marketing authorization holder may subcontract part of PV activities. And yes, this may also include QPPV role. Regarding your question, the marketing authorization holder is still fully responsible for the completeness and the accuracy of the BSMF, and of course the ultimate responsibility for the fulfillment of the pharmacovigilance tasks and responsibilities and the quality of pharmacovigilance system always remains with the marketing authorization holder as per GPPV. And this is the reason why the marketing authorization holder should have very good oversight and collaboration with the third-party vendor if the services are outsourced, or with their own employees in case that the pharmacovigilance and the UKQPV is covered inside. Now, in practice, what we say, we usually see big organizations to keep QPPVs in-house. And outsource only partial global activities like ICSR case processing, aggregate safety reporting, or global literature search, while new marketing authorization holders used to outsource end-to-end PV activities. The same applies to marketing authorization holders who are based in non-EU countries, for example, in the US. They will fully outsource end-to-end PV activities to a vendor who acts and resides in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. I still want to come back to this a little bit more, but just to complete this second question, because I realized when I started answering, I thought about all SOPs in general that we would have, but the question is about the MAH. Even if it was about us, there's still no direct answer.
Maybe I would say at least one. So one SOP
for the MAH,
for MAH mandatory, and then in that SOP, there will be a clear description who is responsible for pharmacovigilance and how the two companies are connected to each other, and maybe references to other documents that the vendor has. Maybe the vendor has a full PV system with all SOPs describing every activity, and there would be a reference to these documents in that main SOP that is the responsibility of the marketing.
Correct. So even if the pharmacovigilance is fully outsourced, just to make clear that vendors' SOPs can be followed. However, you need, as a MAH, to define somewhere also your timelines. How within 24 hours, one business day, you need to report to this vendor all the received ICSR, so also your vendor can meet the timelines. So exactly as also both of you mentioned, it's very important to put timelines and process for communication of safety information to your vendor from MAH to vendor.
And just to finalize, this is also where the BSMF comes in extremely handy. That can be fully done by your service provider. But the moment you get an inspection as an MAH in-house, of course, you may ask the QPPV from the service provider to come, and that person will bring the BSMF. Here you go. It's the whole description of the pharmacovigilance system. And if you complement that with your one SOP as an MAH stating these are the main PV activities, and this is covered by this SOP at the vendor or this or that, then you're completely safe. Good. So we came to a conclusion on this one. That was interesting. And I see one other question was, can a company outsource QPPV service, or is it mandatory to have it in-house? I think we also answered this one. Yeah.
And what about this question about UKQPV?
UK. Yeah, that's very interesting nowadays, indeed. So when is a UK QPPV required? Can the EU QPPV also act as a UK QPPV?
Yes. And then there is a very unique role in UK. The legislation allows for marketing authorization holders who have an EU-based EU QPPV to have a national contact person to MHRA located in the UK. And that person would act as the first point of contact for the local health authority, MHRA, and while the EU QPPV would still reside in EU.
So yes, when it's definitely required, when your products are authorized and marketed in the UK only, you definitely need UK QPPV. If, as a MAH, you have also presence in other European countries, exactly as Albert mentioned, EU QPPV can also cover the UK part, given the national contact person residing in the UK that you mentioned. Now, what is more efficient? Usually, much more efficient is to have
national contact person.
To have national contact person and a single QPPV to cover both EU and UK for an integrated oversight. But of course, it is in MAH discretion to obtain a single QPPV or a separate QPPVs for EU and UK.
And of course, if you only on the market in the UK and not in other EU member state, then you would have a UK QPPV only. Yes.
Yeah.
If you authorize your product.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Just coming back, and maybe that's one of the last, I see we have answered a lot of questions from the audience, all of them. If there's anything urgent still, please write. We have 2 more minutes, I think, before we wrap up. But then I wanted to ask one last one about outsourcing. We spoke about the QPPV and other things, but let's say, Albert, you manage this whole local network.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were an MAH, let's say you're from United States and you have your first products coming up in Europe, you have no network yet, maybe you have some affiliates even, but no PV people. Mm-hmm. Where would you start? How would you do this?
Okay. In my past experience, I saw multiple scenarios how marketing authorization holders would address this. 2 main scenarios are, let's say the marketing authorization holder has already affiliates in Europe, and they can choose a path that they completely let the affiliates find their local people, they find local vendors, probably a different vendor in each country, and then affiliate will take care about the local safety activities through the vendor. The other way of managing it is outsource centrally, right? Mm-hmm. So you have, through the headquarters of the company, you find one vendor that can cover all the countries for you, and you basically can manage all your local PV activities through one vendor. Both of them has pros and cons, of course. If you have a decentralized system, then maybe it requires less effort from the headquarters to do the vendor selection, to identify the right vendor and manage it. But at the same time, you kind of lose the financial control over the vendor prices because the affiliate is doing it. And also you lack the actual oversight. Or if you want to do it, you have to oversee maybe 20 different vendors, which is extremely complicated.
And integrated processors, of course.
The other way of doing it is then you centralize that. This way, you probably have a better financial control. It's one vendor. You can select the one that fits you. And you have usually a much better oversight of what's happening. You know, one KPI table, you know exactly who to turn to, and then it's basically managed through one contact person for you. So eventually, maybe setting up such system requires a bit more resource in a headquarter at the beginning, but going forward, the actual maintenance with such network is in your benefit. It is actually less from the headquarter side. Yes, and we actually recently seen such changes. We had a client recently throughout the past 1 year. They decided to centrally outsource with us and going like for almost all European countries, changing from a decentralized to a centralized model. And we saw that kind of improvement in their oversight and tables and control of the vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I see that we have 3 minutes left, so I need to start wrapping up. There were 2 last questions that just came in. I will answer them in a matter of seconds. Does biomappers have QPPV services? Yes, that's why Olga International QPPV is here. So indeed, we have this. And can you please describe the role of deputy QPPV? Just to be very brief, very similar to QPPV. For one simple reason, if the QPPV drops out, deputy needs to be able to step in immediately. So yeah, roughly the expectations are the same, I think.
And the job description, of course.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We can still talk later about delegation tables between QPPV and deputy and how you do that in practice, but that's maybe for next time.
And also you can have multiple deputies for different...
Yeah, especially large companies have this, but... yeah, exactly. You see, it was so much fun. We're running out of time already. But let me see, was there anything else that I wanted to say on the next slides? Yes, of course, this is what our commercial friends asked me to show, that we do all these services, but I guess that was clear already. Basically, everything we discussed today, that is what we are supporting. That's what we are very proud of. We do this with a rather large international team. So we're very happy to think with you. That's also in our slogan there, small or big, we're a partner that thinks with you. It's important to us. This you can scan with your phone if you want to keep following us. We post a lot of updates on such kind of new things also, or just refreshers of the existing knowledge. So if you're interested, have a go. And what is here? The next webinar, setting up a PV system in Europe, local challenges and peculiarities. If this was not challenging enough, then we invite you in January, probably towards the end of January, we will have a follow-up session. It's probably going to be me and Albert going a bit deeper into some maybe country specifics. We'll see. So if you're interested, please join. Thank you very much, guys. My favorite head of operations, my favorite international QPPV story, Olga.
Head of QPPV office, both work well.
I started messing it up myself. It was really a pleasure. I was so happy to do this in person with you together. I hope it was okay on the camera as well. We did our best. Thank you very much for all your questions, for your engagement. If you have any questions, please don't be shy and contact us. We're happy to talk with you. So thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, rest of the day, wherever you are. See you next time.
See you.
Bye-bye.